One of the things I've often described is in all the negotiations that I conducted with them, I always was struck by the sense of the weight of history on their shoulders. They exist in a real world where all these issues, the core issues, and particularly the narrative issues of Jerusalem and refugees, are part of historic narratives that have been told over and over and over again. And you now, as a leader, have to take on history and mythology. And to say it's daunting is an understatement. So you require leaders who decide that they're going to make history. And the question is, do you have leaders who are prepared to do that?
By and large, there was no understanding from the Palestinian side of how deep the issue of security was vis-a-vis Israel, and the flip. Of course, on the Israeli side, they never understood how damaging the issue of settlements is to the Palestinian narrative. I mean, I was at the AIPAC conference on Sunday, and I kept on hearing over and over from some of the questioners and some people who came after the session, all these arguments to convince me that the settlements are not the real problem. And I was struck, because at the end of the day, give me all of the rational arguments that you want to give me. I know for Palestinians, seeing the settlement expansion is the clearest indication for them that the Israelis are not serious. The big question for me, though, is the day after they say yes, what's going to happen on the ground? How do you sell it? How do you sell a deal that makes a lot of sense in diplomatic terms, yet doesn't give you anything concrete to go to the Republic the next day and say, your life is going to change?
Israelis look at Palestinians and they say, they don't really believe in two states. They believe in a Palestinian state and a binational state. And Palestinians look at Israelis and they say, they clearly don't believe in two states. If they did, why are they building in our state? So it's the disbelief issue that you're going to have to take on in the best case. If the Israelis were only building within the blocks and only the Jewish neighborhoods of Jerusalem, including East Jerusalem, the Israeli position would be, we're not going to build in your state. We're not building anywhere in what we think should be your state. Okay, maybe you disagree on the size of the blocks, but we're going to negotiate the size of the blocks. But we are not going to build in your state. You know, the level of incitement in the Palestinian media is outrageous. It's outrageous. And it tells the Israeli public they're not ready. They're not getting ready for peace. It fortifies the view that this is not about really two states. The fact that you can't find Israel on a Palestinian Authority map hardly provides reassurance to Israelis that they mean what they say about two states. Look, on territory, you're going to have the 67 borders with swaps will be the basis on which you begin to sort things out. There's 120 settlements in the West Bank. Okay, I'm talking about outside Jerusalem. 120 settlements in the West Bank. To put this in perspective, 4 settlements constitute 45% of the settlement population, the settler population. 4 out of 120. So when you start talking about blocks, and you're talking about within 5 to 6% of the West Bank, close to what's the green line, you can accommodate 80% of the settlers. Not 80% of the settlements, but 80% of the settlers. Refugees, look, if there's a right of return, then you don't have a two-state solution. So you're going to come up with some kind of compensation for those who will not be returning to Israel. They'll have a right of return to their own state. And there'll probably be a set of circumstances under which a limited number, where the Israelis are the ones who can make the decision, are allowed to return to Israel, either under a humanitarian rubric, you know, some family reunification basis, something of that sort that keeps the numbers small. And on Jerusalem, look, at the end of the day, as hard as it is, you're going to get the Palestinians to agree to an outcome where they don't have a capital. You're going to have to have one city that is not divided again, because we're not going to go back to that. But you're going to have a city that has 2 capitals for 2 states.
I think some issues simply cannot be negotiated. And I think we will get to a point of complete deadlock when we try to negotiate, say, on the issue of refugees. What is the genesis of the issue of refugees? What was 1948? And how can you negotiate something like this? When 1948, in Arabic, it's called the Nakba, the catastrophe. For any Israeli, it was the year where the diaspora ended and the homeland was created. How do you negotiate that? It's impossible. Whereby the Jewish connection to the land, for example, is something that the Palestinian public gets exposed to and starts understanding. The Palestinian, you know, how Palestinians relate to 1948 and to the trauma of 48 becomes something that the Israelis are familiar with and sensitized to.
You have to show something's different. That's part of preparing the ground for doing a deal. And that's part of the way you also deal with the rejectionists, because you build the constituencies who favor this outcome. And that's something that has to be done. It is something that is easier to do in Israel than it is on the Palestinian side, because the political culture on the Palestinian side is simply different. And for a whole lot of reasons, there's a deeper sense of grievance, there's a deeper sense of victimhood, there's a deeper sense that, you know, making compromise isn't somehow legitimate, it's somehow betraying who you are, it's betraying your principles. It becomes a harder thing to do on their side, so you don't see the preparation in advance.